The logic of the scientific method was set out by John Stuart Mill in 1843 and was named the method of difference. A simple example of what he meant by this is to take two glasses of water which are identical in every respect. Introduce a few drops of ink into one of these glasses. The water changes color. According to Mill's method of difference, it is safe to assume that the change in the color of the water is due to the introduction of a new factor, the independent variable, in this case, the ink. Many people today think of culture in the way that it was thought of in Europe during the 18th and early 19th centuries. This concept of culture reflected inequalities within European societies and their colonies around the world. This understanding of culture equates culture with civilization and contrasts both with nature or non-civilization. According to this understanding of culture, some countries are more civilized than others, and some people are more cultured than others. Anything that doesn't fit into this category is labeled as chaos or anarchy. From this perspective, culture is closely tied to cultivation, which is the progressive refinement of human behavior. In practice, culture referred to elite goods and activities such as haute cuisine, high fashion or haute couture, museum-caliber art and classical music. The word cultured referred to people who knew about and took part in these activities. For example, someone who used culture in this sense might argue that classical music is more refined than music by working-class people, such as jazz or the indigenous music traditions of Aboriginal peoples. Finnish researchers have installed the world's first fully working sand battery, which can store green power for months at a time. The developers say this could solve the problem of year-round supply, a major issue for green energy. Using low-grade sand, the device is charged up with heat made from cheap electricity from solar or wind. The sand stores the heat at around 500 C, which can then warm homes in winter when energy is more expensive. Because of climate change and now thanks to the rapidly rising price of fossil fuels, there's a surge of investment in new renewable energy production. But while new solar panels and wind turbines can be quickly added to national grids, these extra sources also present huge challenges. Right now, most batteries are made with lithium and are expensive with a large, physical footprint, and can only cope with a limited amount of excess power. One of the big challenges now is whether the technology can be scaled up to really make a difference, and will the developers be able to use it to get electricity out as well as heat? The efficiency falls dramatically when the sand is used to just return power to the electricity grid. The introduction of security footage in courtrooms as evidence is increasingly common. With the number of closed-circuit television (CCTV) cameras rising, the likelihood of images deemed relevant for criminal proceedings being recorded also increases. However, while CCTV footage may arguably have assisted in achieving convictions in some high-profile cases, can it assist in the overall reduction of violence against women? A well-known example in Australia of CCTV helping solve a crime is the footage pulled from a shop on Sydney Road the night Jill Meagher was raped and murdered by Adrian Bailey. This footage was mentioned in his sentencing in 2013. In the same year, Simon Gitney was found guilty of the murder of his partner, Lisa Harnham. CCTV footage, taken from his own security cameras, was again interpreted as key evidence. Beyond the courtroom, news media reports of crime are saturated with the use of CCTV footage. In both contexts, it is often seen to be decisive, an authoritative and objective witness that can tell us. Most people assume, correctly, that flowers look the way they do to attract insects that pollinate them. But that's not the whole story. Scientists have now discovered that plants have another trick up their leaves to make themselves irresistible to even the most choosy insect. Cambridge University's Beverly Glover and her colleagues recently set up some fake flowers filled with a sugar solution, which they kept at different temperatures. Unleashing a team of bumblebees on their floral offerings, they watched as the insects visited the flowers to drink the surrogate nectar. Very quickly, it became obvious that the bees were concentrating on the flowers with the warmest nectar. Just in case it was something to do with the color of the fake flowers, the scientists also tried a different color combination and got the same result. Giant exoplanets, like the so-called hot Jupiters that are similar in characteristics to the solar system's biggest planet and orbit very close to their host stars, are excellent targets for astronomers in their search for their extrasolar worlds. The size and proximity of these planets is easy to detect as they create a large decrease in brightness when passing in front of their parent stars. To better understand selfies and how people form their identities online, the researchers combed through 2.5 million selfie posts on Instagram to determine what kinds of identity statements people make by taking and sharing the photos. Nearly 52% of all selfies fell into the appearance category, pictures of people showing off their makeup, clothes, lips, etc. Pics about looks were 2 times more popular than the other 14 categories combined. After appearances, social selfies with friends, loved ones, and pets were the most common, 14%. Then came ethnicity pics, 13%, travel, 7%, and health and fitness, 5%. The researchers noted that the prevalence of ethnicity selfies about a person's ethnicity, nationality, or country of origin, is an indication that people are proud of their backgrounds. They also found that most selfies are solo pictures, rather than taken with a group. Overall, an overwhelming 57% of selfies on Instagram were posted by the 18 to 35-year-old crowd, something the researchers say isn't too surprising considering the demographics of the social media platform. Over the past 2 decades, around a third of the world's mangrove swamps have been converted for human use, with many turned into valuable shrimp farms. In 2007, an economic study of such shrimp farms in Thailand showed that the commercial profits per hectare were $9,632. If that were the only factor, conversion would seem an excellent idea. However, proper accounting shows that for each hectare government subsidies formed $8,412 of this figure, and there were costs, too, $1,000 for pollution and $12,392 for losses to ecosystem services. These comprised damage to the supply of foods and medicines that people had taken from the forest, the loss of habitats for fish, and less buffering against storms. And because a given shrimp farm only stays productive for 3 or 4 years, there was the additional cost of restoring them afterwards, if you do so with mangroves themselves, at another $9,318 per hectare. The overall lesson is that what looks beneficial only does so because the profits are retained by the private sector, while the problems are spread out across society at large. Green spaces contribute significantly to a reduction in soil and aerial temperatures during spells of hot weather, so contributing to human well-being. In the garden context, there is, however, little information as to what extent various types of plants differ in their cooling potential and how certain planting combinations may maximize cooling under a scenario of low rainfall and minimal water inputs. Once an organization has its product to sell, it must then determine the appropriate price to sell it at. The price is set by balancing many factors including supply and demand, cost, desired profit, competition, perceived value, and market behavior. Ultimately, the final price is determined by what the market is willing to exchange for the product. Pricing theory can be quite complex because so many factors influence what the purchaser decides is a fair value. From the earliest civilizations, plants and animals have been portrayed as a means of understanding and recording the potential uses, such as their economic and healing properties. From the first illustrated catalogue of medicinal plants, De Materia Medica by Dioscorides, in the 1st century through to the late 14th century, the illustration of plants and animals changed very little. Woodcuts in instructional manuals and herbals were often repeatedly copied over the centuries. With the growing popularity of copperplate engravings, the traditional use of woodcuts declined and the representation of plants and animals became more accurate. Then, with the emergence of artists such as Albrecht Dürer and Leonardo da Vinci, naturalists such as Otto Brunfels, Leonard Fuchs in botany, and Conrad Gessner and Ulysses Aldrovandi in zoology, nature began to be depicted in a more realistic style. Individual living plants or animals were observed directly and their likeness rendered onto paper or vellum. The practice of giving storms personal names appears to have originated with Clement Wragg, an Australian meteorologist who in the 1890s entertained himself by naming storms after women, mythical figures, and politicians that he didn't like. The modern system of using personal names developed during World War II, when meteorologists began using women's names, often those of wives or girlfriends, instead of cumbersome designations based on latitude and longitude.